Hello and welcome to another episode of Attacking Third, a CBS Sports Soccer podcast. I'm Sandra, Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host Lisa Roman, NWSL analyst and broadcaster. On today's episode, we have a CONCACAF World Cup 2023 qualifier episode. Lots to talk about with North America being represented with Canada, USA, Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Quick reminder though, before we get into everything, you can now rate podcasts on Spotify. If you're listening right now, it only takes a second to click rate and help us over at Attacking Third. That stuff always helps us so much when we're here. Lisa, we're finally gonna preview it. We're gonna talk about CONCACAF qualifiers. These we're excited about this because we've teased it a little bit already in some prior episodes, talking about like, hey, this is one of the big things that we've circled coming soon, right? Coming to CBS, coming to Paramount Plus, something that we're broadcast partners with, and at Attacking Third, where we are the space to cover, women's soccer, non-binary soccer, and so much more. We're like, this is a thing that we want to center in on and highlight because a lot of our listeners can head on over to Paramount Plus when these games start taking place and take a look at some of this international level soccer. So I'm excited to jump into all this with you today. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I am ready for this. I mean, a new week, so ready to jump into soccer. Hopefully, a number of announcements throughout the landscape of soccer this week. So we'll see what happens there. But in terms of CONCACAF W and the W Championship, this almost has been such a long time coming and such a big buildup because months ago, when Karina LeBlanc was head of W Championship and CONCACAF W, she talked about this and the growing the game for all of these different nations and all of the different countries and teams and getting those resources, and how it starts at the top where we can't just have the top two teams in the nation, the United States and Canada, continuously grow and get better. You have to bring all of the other teams with you. And she was very adamant about that and really growing the space for these teams to play and compete, which ultimately grows the resources for these women's national teams in all of these different nations. And it's almost like this trickle down effect. And although it's fantastic that Canada and the United States continue to get stronger and stronger, I mean, two CONCACAF getting 2 gold medals in the summer in this Olympics in Tokyo is huge and impressive, but now it needs to trickle down to all of these other nations in CONCACAF. So really CONCACAF becomes a big powerhouse, not just with 2 top dogs. And of course, Karina LeBlanc is now over at Portland Thorns, and she stepped out of the CONCACAF W Championship role, but she was really instrumental in how this change happened, because we'll get into it all about how everything changed this year for the better, of course. But we had the pleasure of speaking with her about that. So really, that's when my excitement started months ago about this. And it's almost like I had it circled on my calendar and I've just been waiting. And we get to talk about it today. I'm very excited.
Yeah, no, I am too. I think this is the time right before we start hopping into it to maybe kind of remind folks that we've done this, sort of laid some of the groundwork around it already. We've had a number of guests in 2021, and Karina LeBlanc was one of them in talking about these fixtures to take place, these competitions, these tournaments, and how important they are for the continued development of CONCACAF, especially for the nations that aren't those two big top dogs, those two big heavyweight hitters in the United States women's national team and Canada's national team. And so talking about CONCACAF as a whole, that there's 41 participating nations, right? And what does that mean for the rest of these countries who are competing? And so the fact that the championship qualifiers got broken down into certain tournaments, and how on the horizon in the future that there will be actual competitions outside of just World Cup qualifying type events was of huge importance, right, to continue the development of women's soccer across these nations. So we're excited to dive into all of it, but we're going to focus in on these World Cup qualifiers because it's the first of 2 major summer competitions, right? So it's officially 2022, where January has been in full swing. Some matches have already taken place, stemming back to November, but now in 2022, it's really about to start taking off. So the teams that are competing right now at this moment, and who are going to be competing again in this February window, are these other nations. It's 30 other different nations that are going to be competing in these matches, because with the United States women's national team as reigning World Cup champions, and Canada, they actually have full on first round buys, right, to
Mhm.
the actual CONCACAF Women's World Cup qualifiers tournament. And what is taking place right now is just the CONCACAF W qualifiers. Period. So what's occurring right now is that this tournament was essentially divided up into 6 groups, 5 teams, with the group matches beginning play in November, where all the teams are playing 2 home matches, 2 away matches, and the concept is that, or the idea is that the winners of each of these groups will eventually advance to those CONCACAF World Cup Championships, where they then will join United States and Canada ultimately in those bids for a spot in the 2023 World Cup. So this little preview that we're doing right now, these teams, is kind of like the preliminary round, I guess, is
Mhm.
a way to maybe put it in perspective for those listening, because maybe there's some confusion for some folks who are trying to, the casual fan, maybe trying to join in on the qualifiers, and they're like, wait a minute, like where's United States, like where's Canada? They're waiting, essentially. That's what's going on with this tournament.
That's pretty much it. I mean, the fact that those 2 teams in the 2 nations, US and Canada, do get to jump pretty much entirely to the championship. It doesn't mean that they have already qualified for the World Cup, though. That's, I think, a question I've seen a lot coming through my DMs and mentions, and even just through casual fans I'm chatting with this about in my everyday life, that the United States and Canada have not already qualified for the World Cup in 2023. They still need to do that. It just means that they jump to the final of the W Championship, which will be 8 different teams competing, and then those top winners automatically do that. But there's also an added benefit to the W Championship. It's not just like, okay, get to the semifinals and now I'm in the World Cup. If you win the CONCACAF W Championship, you automatically qualify for the 2024 Paris Summer Olympic Games. So it's a double qualification for the World Cup and the Olympics, which that's a pretty big deal, because then that entire year, that nation and that team can just focus on Olympic play, making sure their team is right. They don't really have to worry about qualifying, which is fantastic and definitely puts a little bit of pressure off of them. So the stakes are higher. And this is really the first time we're seeing this within CONCACAF because of this expanded format. It's the first time this is happening for for CONCACAF and for all these nations to qualify, to go through, to get a chance. And this gives teams that have never been able to even try to qualify for the World Cup a chance to do that. If they go on a great run, we could see some new teams, some fresh faces in the Women's World Cup in 23, which I personally would love to see that. Let's keep growing this game, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's get some of these quote unquote underdogs to get some momentum in these matches, compete against some tougher teams, grow their own organizations within their country, and make a run for it.
I'm in agreement with you. I think even just the concept of just having this in
Mhm.
existence was such a huge deal. Because so many of the teams, so many of the nations that are participating in this preliminary qualifiers, are nations that don't often, see their programs spend a lot of time together, get a lot of fixtures together during, international windows when possible. So the teams that are going to come out of this group stage, this preliminary round of CONCACAF qualifiers, these teams will have already had a significant amount of time together when they do eventually advance into that World Cup qualifying championship tournament with United States and Canada. And so you cannot overstate the importance
Mhm.
of these types of moments, of these types of events for these participating nations throughout the region, because we hear so often, right, in the past when we're looking at previous World Cup qualifying events, some of the imbalance that has taken place within some of these matches, and that for maybe that's the common thread there, that for both perhaps the super invested hardcore fan of women's soccer, whether it's United States, Canada, whomever, or in general, and connecting that to maybe just the casual fan that finds themselves, you know, piquing their interest at high events like this, both take a look at the matches and are maybe like, gosh, this isn't something that's, piquing my competitive interest because of maybe high score lines and stuff like that. And so having these sort of preliminary competitions, I think, will only improve, the game on this side for CONCACAF. And I think that's important to highlight as well. So I'm glad that you brought that up for the listeners, that yeah, this is the first time this is happening, and it's cool. Like, it's
Yeah.
cool and it's important that it's happening, and hopefully with the success that the teams find during this time, it will continue on into the future. We talked a little bit about how it's working right now for this preliminary round. We've talked a little bit about what it could mean, right, for some of these participating nations. But let's maybe get into the teams here who are finding themselves competing for a spot to go up against, to join up with United States and Canada in those World Cup qualifying championship tournament. Let's take a look. We mentioned already that it is 30 teams. It is six groups of five teams. We've got for one group, it's Mexico, Puerto Rico, Suriname, Antigua, and Barbuda, Anguilla. Next group is Costa Rica, Guatemala, St. Kitts and Nevis, U.S. Virgin Islands, Curacao. Another group is Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Bermuda, Grenada, Cayman Islands. Another group with Panama, El Salvador, Barbados, Belize, Aruba. Another group with Haiti, Cuba, Honduras, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, British Virgin Islands. And final group with Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Nicaragua, Dominica, Turks and Caicos Islands. So ton of participating nations, heavy influence of Latin American nations, Caribbean nations participating in this preliminary round, Lisa. I mean, it's a ton of nations that we're looking at, and maybe there's some folks who take a look at the groups and they're just like, I didn't even realize that these nations had women's soccer sides that wanted to be competing.
I think that's huge. I think a lot of people, that's going to be their response, is that these maybe considered smaller nations do have teams, and they will be competing because they've all qualified. I think it's interesting to kind of look at how this draw happened, and it did happen in August of 2021. Sandra wrote an incredible piece about it, cbssports.com, right, Sandra? We always got to plug you and your writing. Fantastic writer we have here on the pod, and I'm blessed to be in her presence every day. But it's true, because this, how it kind of shook out was the top 6 teams were going to be preceded, and they were automatically going to be in position 1. So the teams that have either been to the World Cup before and have good records, really just the top teams in CONCACAF, which turns out to be Mexico, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Panama, Haiti, Trinidad, and Tobago, which we chatted a little bit about, Sandra. Not all these teams have even been to the World Cup. And the fact that then now it gets opened up and exposed to have these 6 different groups, each with 6 teams in them, so much opportunity for all of these different teams in these different nations. And it's difficult for some of these nations because they don't have as many resources as other nations do for their women's national team. And that's really the biggest struggle and the biggest issue right now, is trying to find that equality between these teams. And I think this first step of having this type of tournament happening, where these teams are given equal opportunity to compete. Now, they're not given equal resources, and that's a different level and honestly a different conversation that we can have. But they're given the equal opportunity right now to compete in these matches and to continue play and to continue to do that. And some of these qualifiers into this have already happened in November. There's going to be more happening coming up in 2022, which we'll dive into. But I think these teams that you listed off, and then really the top of each group, Mexico is definitely one you have to circle. Costa Rica, Jamaica, of course. But in these competitions, Sandra, when you look at these teams and these different groups that have been laid out, are there teams that stand out to you and nations that you think this is a really good opportunity for them to showcase themselves on a big stage, a global stage?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's maybe always going to be in the front of their minds as well, whether players, coaches, staff, and the admins who are working to put all this together. I think obviously circling Mexico, Costa Rica, Jamaican is like the big three of all of these 30 teams. Is spot on, because when we're looking at of these 30 teams, those are the three. Those are literally the only three nations of all of these countries participating who have ever had any type of World Cup experience. And when we're looking at Jamaica specifically, they literally just made their debut in a World Cup back during the 2019 World Cup in France. So there's always, I think, a potential for those surprises to sort of break through. I think during the World Cup qualifiers previously for the 2019 World Cup, that was part of the narrative around Jamaica, that they were able to get through that tournament and sort of, get past and become that third CONCACAF team to represent in the World Cup. And even thinking back to that previous World Cup qualifier, where there were just a number of surprises that took place. I think people were shocked to sort of see Mexico and Costa Rica kind of shake out and play the way they played, and ultimately not get a shot at participating in another World Cup. And then having somebody like Jamaica and the Reggae Girls kind of rise up a little bit out of that, but also seeing somebody, a nation like Panama, sort of go through and kind of make the upsets that they were making, upsetting Mexico, the sort of rise of Yeneth Bailey in the goalkeeping position, and just sort of looking and getting a shot to see some players that they're familiar with. And that's always the biggest thing for me when I'm watching a lot of these games, or when I'm trying to take a look at any of these CONCACAF fixtures that take place that aren't featuring United States or that aren't featuring Canada. Because the truth is, it's always been difficult to see matches for these teams when they don't often get together to play fixtures throughout a FIFA calendar. So that's the other side. That's the other angle I think that we get to take into this one here, is that these types of tournaments, yes, they're tournaments with high reward, right? And they only feel like they come around so often. And we're talking about how this is the first time that this has been in existence for this one, but it's an opportunity to be able to get to watch some of these nations, be able to get to watch the players that are participating, the coaches who are coaching them on the sidelines, and get a little bit of a look at how they are competing against their other participating nations, because they don't often get the opportunity. We're talking a lot about opportunity here. We don't often see them get the opportunity that is in front of them now. So I think that's the biggest thing. And I mean, while we're talking about, we mentioned, Karina LeBlanc at the top of this episode. I mean, we had an interview with Sadella Marley, right? And talking about, Football is Freedom event, and how that was a small event that they want to turn into an annual event. And it kicked off between Jamaica and Costa Rica, and trying to build on small rivalry there and make it a bigger thing. How those two teams have histories stemming into youth competitions, and now at the senior levels with their club, and how important it is to have, like we're talking about, Lisa, the opportunity, right? Just to have the opportunity to be able to have these types of events and these fixtures and matches for these CONCACAF nations who are participating. So I'm gonna, of course, be looking at those big three that we're talking about: Mexico, Costa Rica, Jamaica. But we're talking about 6 teams that have the opportunity to break out of here and join up. So I would love to see what Panama has been developing because they had so many moments during their 2019 qualifier run where they were showing people some very, very promising things. And you could see the beginnings of something, but this was in 2019. So now I think people are going to be looking at this Panama side and looking for the development. And if there has been any, and what does that look like? And are they going to upset some other teams once again?
I think that's the biggest question. Has there been development? Because we went through a pandemic, and different nations have different resources to combat that and to fight that and to be able to get teams together to compete and even find competition. So that's really the biggest question mark. Yes, we know what happened in 2019 with these teams. The last time we really saw most of them on a big global stage to watch them compete in high intensity games. So now, a few years later in 2022, I hope that they've all improved, right? But it's kind of the question of if they have it and how much they have, because I mean, even you look at Canada, top dog, they just won gold in Tokyo, but they improved drastically over the last few years. They really took those few years to grow themselves. But the tournament and how this shakes out, as you mentioned, top 6 teams, because these 6 groups of 5 teams, the group stage matches are also pretty even, because each team will play 2 matches at home and 2 matches away. So that's also really big for these countries. They don't necessarily have to travel as much as they would have in other type of tournament setups, because they get to play 2 matches at home. So that will hopefully, I mean, larger scale things. Of course, some of these teams are like, yes, we're going to make it to the World Cup, but larger scale, smaller nations get to say, okay, we get to host a game at home, a game that really means a lot in this World Cup qualifying type tournament playoff, so they can grow women's football in that nation specifically. Hopefully they can get some supporters out to the game and grow the fanfare around these teams, get player recognition. Then young girls and little girls that are wanting to play soccer, they can see these national women's players competing at the highest level in their own country, like wearing their country and their nation's flag across their chest. It gives me chills almost to think about. And I do reflect back on the Cedella Marley interview and that conversation we had with her, that it's so much of what we can do now for the senior women's national teams that will only grow the game. Because when you're a little girl, you don't think you can play football. And then you see these women doing that, competing in your country, potentially going to the World Cup. It's a World Cup qualifying match. Your eyes are just open to the possibility of what could happen, right? It gives you goosebumps, right? Of like,
I mean, it does for me. I mean, that's the other thing too. It's like this preliminary this preliminary stage of qualifiers, it highlights almost every other nation that isn't United States and Canada. And that's also something for me that is of equal importance as well.
Mhm.
That these are the nations that are going to be getting the spotlight during this time. You know, not the United States and not Canada. And these are the other participating nations that don't often get that spotlight, that aren't often highlighted in those things, that aren't often given the exposure and the brands attached to them and so on and so forth. So that's always the exciting that was the exciting angle for me, looking at this preliminary stage for these participating nations. And the other thing, honestly, that's always been exciting for me is yes, highlighting those players, the ones that maybe, like I said, that people aren't familiar with watching, but also maybe trying to find the levels of familiarity or the common threads there within each national team. Right, well, we're talking about the big 3 of this preliminary stage in Mexico, Costa Rica, and Jamaica, and being able to sort of take a look and say like, hey, like this player had some ties to NWSL, whether it's somebody like a Rocky Rodriguez or like a Shirley Cruz, or even with Jamaica, having reggae girls play throughout NWSL, and even also being part of the future. I mean, Angel City, making an announcement for their signing of a defender, and Alison Swaby, who captains the Jamaican women's national team, and even on the coaching side of things, for Mexico, that was a big story that, was considered a big failure for the program, that they were unable to break through and qualify for that 2019 World Cup. And it caused a lot of shift in terms of the program and how they were going to do things moving forward. But this is the first qualifying event at the senior level for a coach like Monica Vergara with her women's national team versus somebody like, Ana Maria Valverde for Costa Rica, who has been with Costa Rica for quite some time already. So there's a lot of different storylines and threads to sort of follow throughout this preliminary stage. And I'm excited to see how it shakes out. And I'm, of course, so excited that it's easily accessible, right? That it's going to be easily accessible on across CBS Sports platforms and Paramount Plus. But I'm curious. I think maybe we'll probably have a little bit of engagement, right? For Twitter, I think it would be cool to sort of see where the listeners and where our audience sort of are taking a look at some of these groups. I'm curious. I know we always ask for questions and everything for our mailbags. I'm a little curious if any of our listeners have any questions about any of the teams or this particular preliminary qualifying stage for any of these teams, because again, that's like you said, Lisa, there's people have been asking about it, whether it's been in the DMs or wherever else. We're like, hey, like what's the deal
What does this mean?
with this particular qualifier, and where's the United States and then where's Canada? And they gotta wait. That's the answer. The answer is they gotta wait.
Yeah, but any other questions, I mean, hit us up, Apple Podcast reviews, ask us questions about it there, Attacking Third on Twitter. Any questions about this, I mean, let us know. The windows for 2022 are coming up and they will be happening. So a little more fanfare as we get closer to that. I mean, next game window is February 16th through the 22nd. It'll be those preliminary rounds of those 6 groups that we talked about and those 30 different teams competing, and that's where it happens and really how it shakes out. So we'll know more after February 22nd, and then another FIFA window again for these qualifying matches are in April the 6th through the 12th. But for those that are just focused on the US, I encourage you to watch some of these because this could be US competition coming up, and it's really the future of the game. And the United States will not be competing in these windows, and they will not be playing in these matches. But teams,
they'll be focused on Chiba Leafs Cup.
Yes, exactly. But they're coming up middle of February. It's before you know it, and it's just crazy to think that yes, we're just in 2022, but the 2023 World Cup conversations are flying, and it will be here before you know it.
Little by little, like all those pieces of the big World Cup puzzle are gonna be, put into place, and these are the pieces, right? So I'm excited to take a look at all this, and that's gonna be here quicker than people think. I mean, February 16th is not that far off as we're recording this episode, and sort of seeing the date and knowing what date it is, like in my brain, I'm like, oh, this is actually coming up quite quick. So don't be surprised. We're probably going to have another episode talking about this preliminary stage, and we'll have some soccer games to talk about and cover for everyone in the future. Well, I want to thank you all, as always, for joining us today and listening along to our quick preview of the CONCACAF qualifiers. Follow us on Twitter at Attacking Third. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, anywhere you listen to your podcast shows. Again, if you leave us a 5-star review on Spotify with their new rate feature, that helps us out so much. And if you have any questions for us, you can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts with a question, and Lisa and I will answer it during our mailbag segment. So head on over, Apple Podcasts, question, 5-star review. We'll put it in the mailbag. We're also available as video. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Visit youtube.com/Attacking Third. And we'll be back with more coverage and exclusive interviews for you all. For Sandra Herrera and Lisa Roman, this was Attacking Third.